So Jim has over 20 years of experience managing product development, commercialization of medical devices, advanced coding and drug delivery technology, and he's worked both in industry and academia, guiding processes and products through all stages of development. At ProMed, he oversees program development, activities for polymer-based drug-releasing implants and combination device products, working with a team of engineers to develop new delivery vehicles. Jim has a Ph.D. in applied physics from Vanderbilt University and an MS in management technology from the University of Texas at San Antonio. Jim is the technical director of ProMed and is going to talk to us about injection molded dosage forms for longer term release. Let's go ahead and roll the video.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jim Arps. I'm the Director of Business Development for ProMed Pharma in Plymouth, Minnesota. And I'm pleased to be speaking to you today on injection molded dosage forms for long-term release as part of the CRS virtual workshop in 2020 on long-acting implants. So just a quick overview of what I'm going to be talking about today, give you a little bit of technical background on drug delivery needs in general and some information on my company. Then talk about some of the common drug delivery materials that we use for molded dosage forms and combination products. Do a little bit of comparison and contrast with injection molding versus hot melt extrusion, which you'll be hearing about or have already heard about from some of our other speakers at the workshop today. And then I'll also talk about some design considerations for how to make tooling and related processes for producing high quality molded drug-eluting devices. And then finally, I'll conclude with several examples of products either in development or commercially improved that utilize these different sorts of molding technologies. So a little bit of background on ProMed. ProMed's was founded back in 1989 to focus on injection molded long-term medical devices and high precision components, typically molded out of silicone, but also thermoplastic components. And so we've historically focused on some of the most tightly toleranced, challenging applications in the medical device industry. And they tend to be parts that are generally pretty small. So you can see in the photograph below here, several different examples of injection molded components that would go into various sorts of implantable medical devices. And so a lot of these would be class 3 long-term implantable devices that would be in the patient for their entire life potentially. So about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we had some interest and requests from some of our customers to be able to develop and utilize drug-eluting molded components to improve the performance of certain implantable medical device components. And again, I'll share with you a few examples of that later in the presentation. So that allowed us to found a separate company focused on handling drug product sorts of components and combination products. And in support of that work and continuing to expand our range of offerings to our partners, we have a wide range of injection molding as well as hot melt extrusion and related sorts of compounding and drug coating processes that have been established to support different pharma product development programs. And almost all of our development and manufacturing capabilities are carried out in ISO class 7 clean rooms, typically dedicated to either specific partners or to certain classes of APIs. So some of the different things that we've had experience with at ProMed in terms of active pharmaceutical ingredients include steroids, hormones, antibiotics, and prostaglandins. And some of the sample product applications, which I'll be going into a bit more detail on later in the presentation, are drug-eluting electrodes, implantable sensors, contraceptive devices for women's health, and ophthalmic implants. And so, since ProMed is a contract development and manufacturing organization, it's very important that we have the right quality systems and controls in place to be able to manufacture and develop products under CGMP. So our quality systems meet the required elements of the Pharma CGMP, particularly 21 CFR parts 820, 210, and 211. We've had regular audits by the FDA, CDER, and CDRH of drug-eluting components that we make depending on the mode of action, being primary mode, device, or drug, and we're also 13485 certified. The other element is to have in-house analytical testing that can really accelerate the development cycle for our partners as we start with the early stage formulation and try to move, in many cases, aggressively into preclinical and clinical development. So why are we interested? Why are we here to talk about long-acting drug delivery today? Basically, the most common methods for administering a drug, oral pills, eye drops, for example, have their limitations. In that, if you take a look at the example illustration here of a pill or an eye drop, as you take it and it gets into the system, you'll have a spike in tissue or blood concentrations of the drug, and then as it's cleared away, rapidly goes away over a period of hours or sometimes a little bit longer, and then you have to administer again and again and again. And so patient compliance becomes an issue, and the therapeutic window is much narrower oftentimes than the concentrations that you get with either of those dosage forms. So the goal of long-acting implant is to provide a more uniform, sustained release of the drug at lower systemic levels while optimizing the therapeutic effect. So the other advantages of a long-acting local drug delivery implant is to treat a more specific condition or area of the body, ears, lungs, spine for pain example, ears for treatment of infections. You can improve as the function of a device that doesn't necessarily need the drug, but the drug is there to help mitigate some effects of that device. For instance, a stent for cardiac stenting and opening up blood vessels can scar over, and so the drug-eluting stents were developed to minimize those effects. Other things you can mitigate are side effects such as infection or inflammation with the device. Or you could provide an added benefit on top of what the device is already providing, such as pain relief for an orthopedic implant, for instance. So when you're thinking about designing a drug delivery system, you can break them out into a couple of broad classes. Active drug release systems, I would say, are still kind of in the realm of the future and a bit science fiction, although there are examples that have been demonstrated. And these, to my mind, utilize some sort of external stimulus to release the drug, basically programmable, implantable drug delivery systems. And so one notable example is a device here in the upper right, developed by Microchips, which was a programmable, implantable drug release that you could, it would open up specifically addressable wells to release the drug. And other researchers have looked at both optical, thermal responsive sorts of systems to do much the same thing. But what we're focused on at ProMed and most others as well are on more passive drug release systems, which rely on dissolution and diffusion of the drug within a matrix that's either durable or resorbable. And so the most common ones of these are referred to as matrix systems, which basically where the drug is uniformly distributed throughout the delivery matrix. And based on diffusion processes, the sort of release characteristic you get will be a T to the 1/2 power first order release. Generally, these are easier to manufacture since they're sort of monolithic devices with the drug uniformly distributed throughout. and they're better for APIs and treatment modalities where a wider therapeutic window is fine, or in some cases you may want an initial bolus of drug and then a more gradual leveling off of the drug. Alternately, you can have a reservoir or core sheath system, which basically involves a center core of drug in polymer with a rate controlling membrane on the outside to control the release further. These can be near zero order or linear release profiles that depend very much on the sheath thicknesses as well as the material properties and the drug polymer concentrations. Typically, those are used for APIs where you want to need a tighter daily dose range. So the polymers, the palette of materials that we have to use for long-acting drug delivery are, I would say, relatively few in terms of the ones that are commercially approved and available for use. So the ones with a fair amount of clinical history include silicones, ethylene vinyl acetate, thermoplastic polyurethanes are a little bit newer to the game, but starting to gather quite a bit of attention. And then resorbable polymers, including PLGAs. Certainly there are other ones that are in development and in the clinic, but there's can be substantial barriers to use of new materials. So there tends to be, unless there's a critical need for something new, to stick oftentimes with something that's more tried and true, as we say. So requirements for these materials are, of course, excellent biocompatibility, that they are processable and stable with respect to temperature. They don't interact with the API in terms of either binding it up, preventing its release from the matrix, or chemically reacting with it and changing the API. And then that they have the ability to tune the release through different polymer chemistry, drug polymer ratio, or the use of other things such as permeation enhancers, GRAS compounds, which could be integrated into the drug polymer matrix. So basically, choosing your drug delivery material, you have to consider all the different factors: the API polymer compatibility, the cost of your system, the release rates that you want, the mechanical properties that need to go along with it, limits in processing, temperature, et cetera, for the API, polymer chemistry, and the form, fit, and function of the drug delivery device in its finished form. So as an example here, I show some internal work that we did with an antiretroviral small molecule using 3 different classes of polymers and some different flavors within those classes. So different silicones, in this case, delivered a slightly lower drug release rate. EVAs had higher release rates, with the TPU that we looked at somewhere in between the 2 EVAs. So you do have some in many cases range of choices in your materials depending on what drug release rate you want, and then other ways you can tune it as well. Okay, so talking a little bit, moving on to some of the processing discussions. Injection molding, how does it compare with hot melt extrusion? So in many cases they use a lot of similar sorts of physics and chemistry of the manufacturing. Both of them, you start with the feed material, which could be a blended mix of drug and polymer, and then you go into melting of the material, and then basically injection in the case of injection molding, or extrusion in the case of hot melt extrusion. And so with injection molding, then you're filling a cavity, holding it at pressure, allowing it to cool, opening the mold, releasing it, and basically continuing the cycle. That's one thing to point out is this is an example for thermoplastics. Typically silicones work in the opposite way. You have a 2-part system that you're injecting cold into a hot mold, and you're having a reaction to cross-link the silicone within the mold and then ejecting it that way. So silicones and thermoplastics behave kind of in the opposite manner in terms of how they set. So for injection molding, some of the advantages that we believe, you can see here on the right-hand side, one of our larger injection molding machines. This one has about a 300-ton compression. So the more force you can hold the mold closed, the higher the pressures you can inject with. You can typically have more cavities, make more parts with higher total volume and mass. So you can see here inside, this is an injection mold here that's approximately, I think about 18 inches square, water cooled, and various cavities that are machined into the surface of the mold. So the advantages of injection molding is that it can be very high volume. You can control the final shape, excuse me, based on your molds. And basically you can make your finished part in a single shot in the case of a matrix design. Some of the challenges compared to hot melt extrusion is that you'd need multiple molding steps if you can even achieve it at all for a core sheath design, because in many polymeric implants, the sheaths are very, very thin. So co-extrusion is definitely a winner in those cases. It still can be slower than extrusion for simple geometries such as extruded rods, which are cut to final length. And the materials must be typically compounded before pelletized and used as feedstock for the injection molding process. Whereas in some cases with a hot melt extrusion, with a twin screw extruder, you can mold and extrude in a single pass. So comparing molding versus extrusion of something like a rod implant, you can do it by molding, but if you wanted, again, to make a core sheath design, you're going to possibly have to do something different, such as a coating over the surface of the molded implant. You have to keep into consideration molding the molecular weight change that could happen if you expose it to high temperatures for too long, and API degradation in both cases. So the things that can impact the molded or extruded implant quality are the molding temperatures, the barrel residence time, the injection or extrusion rate, and how fast the materials could cool. For if you want to mold or extrude materials that are in kind of limited supply, experimental APIs, for instance, you do have options with both ram extrusion or piston injection molding to do very small amounts of material. We've done work with things as little charges as small as 100 milligrams of material to start, and making them very small in both diameter and final weight. So here on the illustration at the top is an example of a mold to make a bunch of rods. So basically the materials coming in, you have a disc here that's kind of where the material starts to fill and form, and it flows into kind of up and to the right a little bit, and then is distributed through a small gate that's a disc, and then out into the different spokes that are rods, and these can then be broken off and either utilized at length or cut to final length, versus an extrusion where it would just be continuous and then cut either in line or offline. So in some examples we've found that the molded implants basically take on the surface finish of the mold, so they can sometimes be a little bit smoother than extruded implants. Not in all cases, but in some, you can see in a side-by-side comparison. So hopefully I can run this and show you an example of an injection molding press in operation. Again, this is kind of the state of the art for us. And so you see here the ring mold and a robot coming in, and this is a silicone, a number of silicone rings that are being molded all together. So basically you have a center feed, gates that come out and forming these drug-containing rings. And so basically, we can just break off the runner from the ring and have a finished component. So basically, things that you need to do to improve cycle time would be the use of cold decks. Basically, keep the silicone cold right until it hits the hot mold, or hot runners in the case of thermoplastic, right until it hits the cold mold. Using robotics to remove parts and also do inline inspection is within the realm of possibility. And basically, you want to design your complete systems for manufacturability, and in the early stage, understand the polymer API interactions and formulations necessary to have an effective process scale up. So one of the key challenges in designing an effective injection molded drug component is controlling where the material goes. We're dealing with liquids in melted liquid materials that can be relatively low viscosity and can flow into very small gaps. And so even a few microns during the injection mold can cause it to kind of leak out of the mold and produce what we call flash, which is basically flimsy, filmy material that's not part of the finished, the desired finished dimensions of the products. And again, if you don't design your mold properly, you can have, you can build up high pressures in parts of the mold that forces the mold open and creates additional flash. So one approach is to internally create areas for material flow which you can easily remove after molding. And so we call this, as an example, tear flash. So in the upper left-hand photo, you can see this ridge of material around each of these four squares. So this is a mold that is gated in the center. You can see a little vestige, a little dot in the center. That's where the molded material is coming in. It's flowing out through the thin square into these different, basically 4 simulated cavities. And so there's a little bit of an extra groove intentionally machined into the mold to allow for any excess material to flow once the desired part has actually been molded. And so you can basically peel that stuff away and be left with your final parts in the upper right hand. Another way you can do it is basically the same thing, only in this case we call it a dump ring. So it's more of a bigger piece. And so you have in your lower left hand corner photograph a sort of a cylindrical but tapered component where you might inject it in the center, have the material flow out in both directions. And so you don't have to control it quite so precisely with the total volume. You have these extra pieces at the ends, the little barbells, dumbbell ends that can be basically plucked off at the end to leave your final desired component at the end. So things that we think about in molding are material shrinkage. Some materials can change, as they cool or cure, will change a few % in volume depending on the material. Surface finish of the mold is important. More polishing typically results in a more expensive tool, and you often get poorer part release with less polish because it'll tend to want to kind of fuse in and there's very little gaps for the material to want to release. Because you also typically don't want to use any sort of chemical mold release agents to release your parts. So for dimensional tolerances, a common design tolerances are 2.5% of dimension or 0.003 of an inch, whichever is greater. For a lot of drug components, we have to go much tighter in tolerances to that. Not uncommonly in the range of microns, because again, we're trying to design and fabricate a part where we're controlling the total drug load to much better than plus or minus 10%. Sharp edges are difficult to mold and can add costs and impact your tolerances. And So we prefer to make things that have slight curves to them to help things along. So again, in relation to the previous slide that talked about, tear flash and minimizing flash, you definitely want to consider the pressure balancing, the flow balancing of the mold in the last areas to fill. So I thought I'd share with you a simulation that we did recently on kind of a model vaginal ring. And you can see here as I start the simulation that the material coming in from this side and filling four cavity ring mold. So you see, this is what they call the runner. These are the gating where you have a tab gate so you get more uniform filling. You can see that, I'll run it one more time, that the filling of all four cavities is pretty close. These two fill slightly faster than these last two, so that would be, again, a case of something where we'd be concerned about, we'd want to tweak that perhaps a little bit to get even better complete filling, so there's no more pressure buildup in one set of them than the others. You can also see then we've also engineered this tear flash feature, so this little ridge of material here that can be plucked off at the end and making it easy to prepare the finished device. Okay, so a few examples then. So the first application that we got into and has been around for many years is a drug-eluting cardiac pacing lead. So it was found many years ago that incorporation of steroids into the region where a cardiac pacing lead is implanted in the heart muscle wall can have benefits in terms of minimizing the fibrous capsule buildup around the implant. So basically, this upper left illustration, you can have a helical coil that provides the pacing implanted into the muscle wall, and when that's implanted, there's a fibrous reaction that can form a capsule around that implant and can raise the resistance of the lead to provide effective stimulation. And so in the graph to the right, you can see some clinical data where the use of steroids reduced the threshold, the voltage required to provide effective pacing by several tenths of a volt, which is physiologically and more important for the life of the battery, very important, and will have an effect on the useful life of the battery. So basically there is a number of different steroid-eluting component designs. There's plugs that can be embedded inside the tip of the pacing lead and provide the drug release, or collars which go around the outside and provide a slow release of steroid. So just a little bit more on examples of in vitro release testing. So dexamethasone is a common steroid used in this application, and so you can utilize incubator shakers or AP2s for release of the drug. And this is a typical sort of curve that you can get. And we've molded hundreds of thousands of these steroid-eluting components over the last several years. Typical drug loads are less than 1 milligram, and we found that both the polymer matrix, the form of the drug, whether it's a salt form or free base form, the way the drug and polymer are mixed, the sterilization method, the cure conditions, and the drug particle size can all have impacts on the drug release profile, not surprisingly. So, and with our partners, we've developed specifications for the drug release assay impurities to be able to analyze and release product lots. So another popular class of drug-eluting molded devices are in ophthalmology, and so I wanted to show a few examples here. One that we worked on is a punctal plug. And so this is a molded silicone component that goes into the tear duct of your eye. And these are approved for use non-drug-eluting forms for treatment of dry eye. Basically, the tears, the plug prevents the tears from draining, and hence the tear film is maintained at a higher level on the eye for a longer period of time. But we molded these with a little reservoir within which you can place a drug and then utilize the tear function to release the drug to the surface of your eye. And we provided clinical trial materials for this, for studies that have utilized drugs to treat glaucoma and postoperative pain. Other molded products on the market or in late-stage clinicals are refillable depots. This is one that's being developed by Genentech. It's a reservoir that's surgically implanted in the sclera of your eye, and basically can be filled with whatever drug that you want and replenished at a period of every several months. There are also injectable depots. This is a molded or kind of cast resorbable implant that's injected into the eye. And then there's also ocular rings that can go on the outside of your eye, kind of like a contact lens that can also release drugs for periods of weeks to months. The other large area of use for molded dosage forms is in women's health. There are a number of intravaginal rings which are injection molded, as well as IUDs which utilize molding processes. So I just have a short list of ones that are either in development or commercial. There's a progesterone ring for improving outcomes of women undergoing in vitro fertilization. There are some IVRs in late stage development for treatment of endometriosis. Intrauterine devices for contraception are some of the longest acting implants that I'm aware of. So some of the IUDs, hormone-eluting IUDs, are approved for continuous use up to 5 years, I believe. And so the drug sac, which incorporates the hormone, is typically a molded component which is assembled onto the T-frame. There's a microbicide-eluting IVR in late-stage clinical studies for prevention of HIV transmission in women. There's recently, within the last year, a 12-month contraceptive ring that's been approved. Other things that have been looked at are lubricant-filled IVRs for vaginal dryness and ones for treatment of overactive bladder. And then, of course, there's bioresorbable contraceptive implants that are being explored both by molding and extrusion. So one of the holy grails for drug delivery in general is certainly long-term release of macromolecules. And some work we've done at ProMed has looked at the use of porous molded silicone matrices for release of biologics. And we've demonstrated this with peptides, model proteins, and the like. And of course, the challenge for us, as well as most people looking for a long-term release of macromolecules, is maintaining stability. But we've been able to load silicone foams by different methods to get release over a period of weeks so far. And as an example here, just as a model of a compound, rhodamine being incorporated into a ring and releasing over a period of time. So I want to thank you for your time and attention. Some general takeaways from my presentation is that I hope you can see that molded polymer-based implants are a good option for long-term drug delivery with several commercial and late-stage development examples. Certainly trying to decide on your materials and tool design will have a key impact on the long-term manufacturing costs, scalability, and effectiveness of your final product. And we're making advancements here at ProMed and others elsewhere, which will hopefully enable even new generations of advanced drug delivery systems. So thank you again for your attention, and have a good day.